Anybody who's done any one of a whole host of practices that bring you to greater awareness, cultivated awareness about the breath, understands how to be with someone as their body begins to shrink and dry up, and you don't see very well, and you don't hear very well, and you don't smell or taste, and you begin to kind of fade or withdraw from the ordinary world. That whole process that is the dying process is such that towards the end of life, what you're left with is mostly breath. What was so interesting to me was how little interest he had in trying to find the best doctor or do anything heroic to try to find out what his diagnosis was or live longer. A wonderful man named Mickey Stunkard, who was on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. He came to see Suzuki Roshi that summer after he came back from Tassajara and was, among other things, quite jaundiced and complained about being very itchy. And Mickey Stunkard immediately guessed that Suzuki Roshi had metastasized gallbladder cancer. He actually suggested to Suzuki Roshi that he could take him to one of the really great experts at Stanford and have a second opinion and maybe help get his a diagnosis a little bit more quickly. And Suzuki Roshi said, no, I'll just stay with my doctor here. The day the doctors told him that he had cancer, I came into the room where he was staying right after the doctors had been with him, and he patted the bed next to me and said, here, come, sit down. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his legs dangling in his little, hospital gown. The nurse had just brought his lunch in on a tray. And in the preceding weeks, Mrs. Suzuki and I had been quarantining his utensils and his food because the doctor had said it looks like he has hepatitis and you have to be very careful to not use his utensils and keep the food separate. And so we'd done all that. And so this particular lunchtime, Suzuki Roshi motioned to me to come over, sit on the bed next to him. And as I walked towards him, he mouthed the words, I have cancer, with a kind of grin on his face. And I sat down next to him, and he leaned over, and he took a fork full of food from his lunch plate and fed it to me and said, now we can eat together again. I remember some days when he began to be more quiet and didn't talk a whole lot. I can remember sitting next to his bed, and every once in a while, this little skinny arm would come out from under the covers, and he'd kind of stick it out in the air like this, and then I'd massage his arm, and then he'd slowly put it back under the covers, and then, 5 or 10 or 20 minutes later, another arm would come out from under the covers, and then I'd massage that arm, and it'd disappear back under the covers, and then an hour later a leg would come out from under the covers, or he'd indicate that maybe I could help him sit up and rub his back, but not so much out of pain or as a way of distracting, but just he was giving me something to do to help him be comfortable. By the time he died, when I looked back on those months, I kind of would shake myself and think, at no point did I feel like anything extraordinary was going on, and yet the cumulative effect of being with him in those months was that I'd been in a circumstance and with a person who was quite extraordinary. That caught my attention, that juxtaposition of ordinary and extraordinary. That was my idea of how it's supposed to be done, or at least how it can be done. And what I marvel at is that I've actually been able to sit with a number of people in exactly the same way. There's a quality of intimate connectedness when you sit with someone while they're dying that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with knowing their life story or even knowing their name. There's a way you can know someone with the kind of intimacy that I always thought was restricted to a lover or to one's child. And I'm very grateful for having learned about that capacity for meeting that we all have. And Suzuki Roshi is really the first person who demonstrated that to me and allowed me to have that kind of experience with him.